Workplace conflict is inevitable when employees of various backgrounds and different work styles are brought together for a shared business purpose. Yes, it is. Conflict can and should be managed and resolved with tensions and anxieties at an all-time high due to the current political divide and racial inequity discussion at work. The chances for workplace conflict have increased at large, especially the generational effect also. So the question is, are the conflict really unproductive in the workplace? A very warm welcome to season 7 of EI Cafe with Azim, and I'm your host Azim Said, a human capital specialist, a Lego Series Play facilitator, ICF certified coach, and an emotional intelligence and culture tech practitioner. Here we are again for another interesting topic, a 30 minutes of valuable learning. So you heard the topic. We are talking about conflicts. Are conflicts really unproductive in the workplace? So to have a discussion on this, I have one of a colleague who's joining me all the way from Toronto, Canada. Let me give a quick introduction. She helps teams have a conversation that will create business breakthrough. And she's a best-selling author, keynote speaker, and an HBR contributor, specialized in team effectiveness, strategy, and leadership development. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Liane Davey, co-founder of Three Cores Inc., author and speaker. Liane, welcome to the cafe.
Thanks, Azim. I'm very, very happy to be here.
Thank you very much for your valuable time. I know it's early in the morning in that part of the world.
Yes.
So spending your valuable time is, I really appreciate and gratitude for that as well. So Liane, I think this is one of your favorite areas. I've been looking at your whole profile and be following you for a long time, and you'll be really have these conversations, and especially difficult conversations, right? Because people think that conflicts a problem. That's the whole idea has been generated. When you say conflict, the whole idea comes is problem, right? And of course, not only workplace, of course, our house and the communities, environment, everywhere we will have it, because we are different. We are different human beings. We are different in terms of emotions, feelings, and of course, there'll be conflicts. On that note, Liane, I just want to ask you with this particular question start off, why conflicts exist in an organization?
Great question. And it's because organizations are trying to meet conflicting and opposing needs with limited resources. And so, on the one hand, we're trying to do something that pleases our customer. We're trying to do something that is differentiated from our competitor.
Mhm.
We're trying to do that in a way that is rewarding and engaging for our employees. And we're trying to do it in a way that's profitable. And we often can't do all of those things at once. And so conflict is inevitable in organizations, even if we talk about a healthy organization with strong relationships, it's inevitable. And then, as you mentioned, we have humans in organizations, at least for the time being.
Absolutely.
So we'll see. Still. But while we do, we are very different, and we pay attention to different things, and we value different things, and those things come into conflict with one another very often. So there are good conflicts and bad conflicts, but we are definitely stuck with conflicts forever as long as we're trying to meet various different opposing needs with scarce resources.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on, right? Limited resources are limited, high KPIs, objectives, right? Timelines, you push people, there you go, you burst your motion and put it out and start fighting, right? Yeah. And I was really impressed. I go through your LinkedIn and the psychology of water cooler psychology, right? If I'm not mistaken, right? So what do you think about how important is this water cooler conversations? And is it encouraged by the leaders? Because what I'm asking is, generally, people tend to like, okay, there's a hustle going there, something going wrong, and a lot of how goes on, and misconception, misunderstanding comes in. So I just want to clarify, how important is water cooler conversation? Is it encouraged?
Yeah, I think water cooler conversations are really, really important because they are chances to learn and understand context. It's where we get sort of the information surrounding the email. Water cooler conversations are the place where we can get to know one another and actually start to build trust. When we're having conflict, it's the body language and the moments at the water cooler where we start to understand, oh, I think things may be getting better, or maybe I could try and reach out. So there's a whole variety of things that are important about that unplanned, unstructured collision of people that happens at the water cooler. And interestingly, in the return to office conversations, when people are saying, I can be just as productive working from home, I think we're thinking about productivity in just one version, and we're not thinking about all of the things that come from that water cooler conversation that haven't been happening for the last couple of years because we haven't figured out the virtual water cooler.
That's a valid point, and I really like the point you brought, working from home. Yes, at the initial stage of whole COVID, we were very curious and interesting working from home and whole setup. But still, when time passes, what do you think? Have you experienced? What is your thought process? Was the conflict increased during that period? Because people are not meeting each other, not having that one-to-one conversations. Let's say we are having conversations on Zoom or MS Teams. Sometimes we don't see the faces because switched off, the camera is switched off.
Yeah.
Do you think these are a little bit of can create some impact and conflict? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think while we've been remote, there are certainly some kinds of conflicts that have been reduced. So if you think about just how we behave around the office, so if somebody's very introverted and one of their colleagues is constantly interrupting them at their desk, well, that probably isn't happening anymore. One of the things that used to make me most angry is people who would leave their dirty dishes in the sink at my office. Now it's just my teenager that I that I have to share the kitchen sink with. But those sort of irritants, those kinds of things are greatly reduced when we're remote. But I think the other thing that's been reduced is the opportunity for the productive conflicts, the important places to understand what a different department is trying to accomplish, or to really get a sense of how do we optimize a decision. We haven't had as many opportunities for that either. And so I think we've lost some of the conflict that's important, while also losing some of the conflict that's been kind of nice to be without for a while.
Absolutely. So Liane, I'm just curious, as you're saying now, we're seeing people coming back to workplaces. Is the conflict increased or
so
decreased?
I haven't seen much of it yet. It's certainly, people are coming back to workplaces, but many of the people I work with are coming back 2 or 3 days a week. And I think that's been a nice level. So they can enjoy the benefit of being together, of being able to have those difficult conversations with a little bit more openness, more space, and literally just the feeling of feeling like you're in one of these little Zoom boxes. It doesn't feel like there's kind of room psychologically to have these conversations. So now we're together in a physical place. And when it's only 2 or 3 days a week, I don't think we've yet got back to those normal irritants yet. So I haven't seen a lot of that friction returning yet. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if we stay in a hybrid working world for ongoing, then maybe we'll have enough of that space, a couple of days a week, to be remote, be productive, control our environment, and that'll be enough to then feel like when we are in the office, we can, maximize it, make it a positive thing. So that's my optimistic take.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Liane. Right. So the whole idea, I just want to pick up this particular topic. We have been working around a lot of, conflict, resolving conflict sessions and, managing conflict sessions. Yes, we do talk about it. There are frameworks, a lot of things can be done. But then again, I always believe it's just human beings interacting, turning out to a conflict. But the problem is, how do we label it? Is it productive or unproductive? So my next question for you is it unproductive for an organization? Because leaders look at bottom lines, numbers. When you're having that conflict, sometimes delay in deliveries, quality less, a lot of things comes across. What do you think?
So I differentiate between the two different versions. So when I'm talking about healthy, productive conflict, I talk about it as tension. So that we know what tension is when we're sort of pulling things that make us bigger, make our resources go further, make us think in new ways. It's still uncomfortable, but it's very good for organizations. So I was working with an organization recently, a software organization, and the sales team was out selling things without understanding the engineering implications of what they were selling. And then it turned out later they were also not aware of some of the legal and compliance issues. And so what had happened is there was no conflict. There was no tension on their ability to sell this new thing. And not having that has now left the organization having to catch up and figure a bunch of things out. If they had that conflict in the open, what is this sales opportunity? What does it mean for the product and engineering? What does it mean from legal? If they'd had that conflict in advance, they might have decided that, yes, this is worth it, and let's build in the things we need. Or they might have decided this isn't worth it. So the organization would have been much better off to have that conflict proactively. So tensions, and that would be a tense conversation. Sales is really keen to, we've got this amazing new opportunity. We want to sell this. It would be very tense. There would be a lot of tension in saying, hang on, right? The other kind of conflict I refer to as friction. So one of the things I do to make it more visual in people's minds is that tension. I think of it like doing yoga. Oh, it hurts and it's a stretch and it's very uncomfortable, but it makes us better. It makes us healthier. It makes us stronger. The other kind of conflict I refer to as friction, and you can think of friction like getting a blister. Oh, there is nothing healthy or good or positive about that. And friction is when we have conflict where we don't listen to one another. We're critical of one another as people. Friction is conflict without emotional intelligence. And that kind of conflict is very harmful, not only for organizations and their productivity and their engagement and trust, but for us as individuals. When we experience conflict, it's extremely stressful. It affects our mental health. So I don't prescribe whether conflict overall is good or bad for organizations. I say we need way more tension than most organizations have, and we need way less friction. So big difference between the two.
I like that part, the tension and the friction. It's very rhyming and it's very visual and metaphorically. Yeah. I can just feel it. And you say yoga and the whole, I can feel it, right? And
yeah, then, I think the hard thing is that it's not, if we just use the measure of, is this uncomfortable, to decide whether it's healthy or not, it doesn't work. So it's understanding what's the uncomfortable conversation that's going to lead somewhere very positive, like the yoga, and what's the uncomfortable conversation that's just injuring us and wearing us down like blister.
So Liane, it's really interesting point you brought it out when you talk about tension, right? Is communication and relationship plays a vital role here, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it plays a vital role in both. So when we are in productive tension, we are empathetic, we are curious, we are trying to understand. So as the salesperson in my example, we're really thinking about, what am I missing? What did I not see about how this would require changes to the code? What else do I have to know? What do I need to pay attention to? So there's curiosity, there's interest, there's empathy, there's openness. When we get into friction, it's the exact opposite. Well, these are my revenue targets I need to hit for the quarter. So I don't care what you guys have to do. I'm going to go sell this because that's what I need to do. And then it's your problem. Go figure it out. Right. So communication, listening, empathy, all of those skills really make the big difference between whether you can get the benefit of productive tension or whether you slide into that really unhealthy friction.
So I see a little bit of emotional intelligence sliding down just on that particular note, because I always believe that, getting into another person's shoes and just feeling it, as you said, empathy, be a little bit compassion. Sometimes, we get misguided by the whole tension which comes around it.
Yeah.
I was just sharing the loss of my sister. The whole week, like, we've been really brothers. I have two my brothers. We're trying to really pick it up. We have that environment sounding coming to us and telling a lot of various things, and we get also a little bit of getting into that conflict mode, which is unhealthy, doesn't make sense, and it's not going to bring anyone back.
Right. So, exactly. And having friction among your brothers is just going to prolong the agony, right?
Yeah.
But there is going to be tension. And understanding that, how do we remember her? How do we keep her memory alive? It's okay for there to be tension about those things. One of you might believe there's one way of remembering her or honoring her, and somebody else might feel the different way. It's not wrong. And what you want to do is understand, okay, you're thinking of doing that. What's behind that? What's making you value that? How do you see that playing out? To truly want to understand how could their idea of what to do be so different from mine? But honestly, to wonder, how could their idea be so different from mine? So understanding that there is going to be tension. It's going to be uncomfortable, and that's not a sign that you don't love each other, that you're not doing it right. But what we want to avoid is the friction, which is, being accusatory. You just don't get it. You didn't know her. That's not what she would have wanted. Things that are hurtful, things that don't move it forward. So even in a family situation, we should expect and value those tensions, even on something much less important, like where are we going to go on holiday this year? Some people love a holiday that's like planned to the minute and full of activity, and some other people love a holiday where I just want to sit on a beach chair, and those are tensions, and that's okay. And figuring out, okay, which days are we going to do museum tours and castles, and which days are we going to just read a book by the beach? That's okay. But if we start, well, you never do anything I want to do, and our vacations are always just what you want. Like, if we start making it personal and nasty and accusatory, that's the friction we don't want. So yeah, just understanding, even in a family situation, you can really differentiate between what's tension that's okay, it's still uncomfortable, but it's okay and it's normal, and what's friction that's really going to erode the trust among you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I think it added a lot of values. Now, I think we're talking about relationships, talking about family situation also. It's great. So Liane, I just want to move out from that particular line for, getting into more leaders' perspective, right? Now, you mentioned that conflicts may occur because of the targets, less resources, or very minimal resources, but huge tasks to be done, pushing people, lack of communication, conflicts comes in. Now, as leaders or managers or supervisors, how one can recognize whether it's a fraction or a tension? I'm using your word. Right?
Yeah, and it's usually pretty obvious, all right? So friction is going to be clear. You're going to see lots of interrupting, right? There is no space in between people talking. People get so emotionally agitated that they kind of interrupt each other. That's a very important thing. People start to use absolutes in their language. So in some cultures or some places where being emotional at work is not normal and would be seen as unprofessional, we don't get angry, we don't raise our voices, but we start to do things like add in absolutes. So we always do this, or you never do this, or every time. When we throw in those absolutes, that's a sign that, oh, this is starting to become friction. We're not now listening to each other and trying to understand each other. That's another sign. So there are going to be obvious signs, and certainly if you start to see the emotional reaction, you can kind of hear it in someone's voice. Often you see it, tears welling in their eyes. You see someone's face starting to get red with anger or frustration. So voices get louder and louder and louder. So, you can tend to see it. The other thing is friction tends to be much more about statements. And when you're in the tension, it looks more like questions. So lots of obvious telltale signs that you're leaving curiosity, you're leaving empathy and listening and the land of productive tension, and you've started to enter that unhealthy friction.
That makes a lot of sense. And I always really advocate that every leaders, every human being need to practice emotional intelligence. I think that's what you are just saying about, right?
Yeah.
Verbal or non-verbal, every language you need to learn to really understand. So thank you very much, Liane. So we are just coming in the end of our conversation. Just how can we resolve conflict in an organization? What is your thought?
So I think the first thing to remember is that the goal is not to resolve productive tension. The goal is to have that there forever, because you want your salespeople fighting for products that are more customized, that are differentiated, that are new and exciting and tailored to their specific customer. You always want that. But at the same time, you always want your operations people to be fighting for more consistency, more standardization, more efficiency. Those two paths don't meet. And that's a good thing. I always say, if sales and operations in your organization are not fighting, sell your shares, because that's the sign of a dying organization. So the first thing to remember is we don't want that kind of conflict to end. We want for every decision for those conflicts to come into an open forum where we can understand the different demands. So in the example I was giving you before, we want sales to bring the opportunity to the table. We want for engineering to be able to say, here's what it would take, and legal to say, if we're going to work with that kind of a customer, our product needs to be able to do these things. And engineering to say, okay, doing those things would cost this much and take this long. And we need to have a forum to then decide for that one conflict, what's the best answer for the company. So conflict resolution is one decision at a time, and it's never going away. It's the conflict resolution where it's become interpersonal. And usually in that case, those folks that are involved are going to need help from someone else. They're going to need help to listen to one another. They're going to need help to become curious about possibilities, again, to have someone help broker that. It's too much to ask to have two people who've gotten into that kind of friction somehow get over it themselves. So a supervisor or a manager can really help in making sure that there is a safe forum for each of them to share, what matters to them, the things that they feel have not been respected or not been heard. So if it's that kind of conflict resolution, it's going to take some help from somebody other than just those two people. And it's going to take a lot of work on backing up, restating things, listening differently, testing out and trialing. What if we were to do this? what needs to be true for you, what needs to be true for you, how do we, kind of find a resolution where both of those things can happen, those sorts of things. So very different depending on whether we're talking about conflict resolution of tension, which is just going to be over and over and over again, finding the optimal solution, versus conflict resolution of something that's really a relationship-based thing where you're going to need to get other people involved. And hopefully when they learn to understand one another better and listen, that's something you can resolve once and it doesn't come back in the same way.
Absolutely. This is why I always say leadership is very difficult.
Oh, yes. Very, very, very. Very, very,
it's not only numbers. It's not about KPIs. It's more than that, and just managing humans. It's a different ball game.
Infinitely hard.
And that's why leadership is so important for a successful organization. So Liane, thank you very much for sharing that. I think we're just coming for an end of the conversation. Before I let you go, I always ask my guest, give me 2 golden nuggets for our listeners, a tip.
Yeah, so I think it's maybe not a tip per se, but it's a line that I repeat to myself. So I'm somebody who doesn't like conflict. I grew up being very conflict avoidant. At 50, I'm still conflict avoidant. I don't like it. But the line that I have to tell myself all the time is some things are worth fighting for. And so the tip is really understand who you are fighting for. So if you're the salesperson, understanding you're fighting for the customer to get the perfect product that's going to meet their need. But if you're legal, you're fighting to protect the company, and that's worth fighting for. So, I find many of us in many cultures that don't like conflict, it's hard for us to have conflict, and we'll tend to just back away from it if it's just about us. But once we understand that I'm not fighting for me, I'm fighting for this cause or these stakeholders or this outcome, suddenly then we can say, okay, that's worth fighting for. So that's the tip I would say. Just change your perspective and understand what or whom you're fighting for. And it feels a lot easier than just, fighting for the sake of a fight.
Fantastic. So ladies and gentlemen, that's the time that we have for today. My key takeaway is it tension or a fraction? And I think you have the message on the podcast. I hope our listeners got plenty of takeaways from this particular episode. My humble gratitude and thanks to Liane Davey, co-founder and author and speaker. Of course, she's a very helpful. She has a fantastic article written on LinkedIn. You can get connected through LinkedIn, or you can log on to www.lianedavey.com. All the details will be in the podcast note. Of course, you can access and explore some amazing work she does. So Liane, thank you very much for your lovely insights and experience shared. At the same time, your valuable time spent in the cafe. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Azim. I had a lovely time in the cafe.